this video, we're going to go over configuring a third-party audio interface that was not purchased from Listen. I will be using an RME Fireface UCX on Windows 7 that I do not know the VP values of. The VP value tells SoundCheck how to interpret the digital signal from an audio interface. It's the peak voltage corresponding to digital saturation. When we talk about calibrating a device, it isn't actually changing any of the settings on the device itself. The interface will stay as is. When we first open SoundCheck, we'll see the Setup wizard. We'll click on Setup New Hardware, and SoundCheck will automatically identify the UCX. If your device is not automatically detected by SoundCheck, you'll have to go into the system hardware and manually enter each channel individually. We'll click Next here, and apply the stock VP values and latencies because we don't have anything more specific. We'll need to go into System Hardware to calibrate this device, so we can click on this arrow to close and open the hardware editor directly from the Setup wizard. Once the system hardware is open, we can right-click on an input or an output channel and select Calibrate Using. When you calibrate an audio interface, you can calibrate one input and one output at the same time, but you cannot calibrate more. Because this is an 8-channel audio interface, I will have to run the calibration sequence 8 times, but each time I can calibrate 1 to 1, 2 to 2, and so on. Once you select the input or output to calibrate, a sequence will start. The first message is how to set up for the calibration sequence. The output that you have selected will need to connect to a calibrated RMS voltmeter using a T-connector with one side open. Here's a picture of how I set up my audio interface to run this test. The red 1/4 inch cable is going from the output 1 into a T-connector. One end of that T-connector is open for the future input calibration. Because we run this test often, we have a custom-made box with the T-connector inside. But as long as you have a T-connector, you can run the test. Now, when I hit enter, a signal generator will open, outputting on channel 1. You'll need to record what shows up on the voltmeter. The measurement I read on this meter is 1.195 volts. Once I have this written down, I will hit enter again in SoundCheck. Another message box will show up, asking me to enter the voltage indicated on the external voltmeter. So here I put in 1.195 and hit enter. The next instructions say to keep the selected output connected to the voltmeter, but to connect the open side of the T-connector to the selected input. So here's again my setup. All I did was leave the red output connected to the T-connector, but now I connected the blue input across it, while still reading onto the voltmeter. I'll hit enter to continue. We now follow the same procedure we just did. We look at our external voltmeter, and we write down that it's reading 1.180 volts. We'll hit enter in SoundCheck, and enter that value into the next message box. After we enter that value, the next instructions say that once we hit enter, the signal generator and multimeter will open. Once they've stabilized, we'll hit enter again to continue. Now we see the final display of the audio interface calibration. Everything has passed, and the frequency response is what I'd expect. At the bottom, you can see what the measured output VP, input VP, response margin, and what the sound card delay is. Once you hit enter, these will automatically fill into the table. So if we look at input and output 1, their VP values are a little different and more precise, and their latency was actually 4 samples off from the default. I'm only going to calibrate input and output 1, but if you want to calibrate the rest of your interface, you would just repeat the process for all inputs and outputs.